Hello and welcome to Book Club Live. And tonight's book is Rage Inside the Machine by Robert E. Smith. And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to be talking kind of in conversation with Robert for about half an hour. Then we have a 10-minute break. And the idea of the break is it's really a chance to kind of think about some of the things that we've been discussing and perhaps some of the things that you wanted to talk to Robert about. And then you can text in your thoughts and your questions. And the second half, around about half an hour, we'll put those questions to Robert and have kind of more of a discussion. I think the number to text in for Book Club Live questions was on the email you were sent. But if not, don't worry. If you just scroll down, it's at the bottom of the screen. So do feel free to get involved. This is a book club for all of us. So Book Club Live is set up by Salon London, which is an organisation that I'm one of the founders. I'm Helen Bagnall. And we've been doing these for about 2 years, but in a field. So we decided lockdown was a good time to turn where we live in the flat to a TV studio, mainly as a way of stopping us eating so many crisps. Talking of crisps, I hope you have some, or maybe some olives or something. I know we've got some Parisians in tonight, so a very sophisticated audience. But the main idea is that you have a really nice, relaxing Sunday night and Book Club Live. Except, of course, we are going to be grappling with algorithms. So maybe in the break, you might want to get yourself a glass of wine or a cocktail or a mocktail or whatever you want to have a good evening. So it just remains for me to introduce Robert E. Smith. Now, Robert has worked in artificial intelligence in that field for about 30 years. He's an expert on evolutionary algorithms, and we'll be finding out a bit more about what that is. And his AI, the work in his AI has really been about predicting, well, it's all kinds of areas, from predicting fighter jet maneuvers, revealing emotion in financial markets, and explaining how social networks can drive us apart politically. He's also a senior fellow at University College London here in the capital, and yet he somehow also found time to write this book, Rage Inside the Machine, The Prejudice of Algorithms and How to Stop the Internet Making Bigots of Us All. Quite a subject. Hello, Robert. Welcome to Book Club Live.
Hi, Helen. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you. How is your lockdown going?
Oh, pretty well. It's been, at least we've had good weather and get a few walks in. It's not too bad.
Yeah, I think the weather has really held us together. It's been a tough week, I think, for a lot of people, especially with the weather getting a little bit more English. So yeah, I hope it comes back soon. I think you've got a Manhattan, haven't you?
I do. I have a Manhattan in front of me.
Yes, you're ready for Book Club Live. Excellent. So I sort of said at the top of the show, you're an expert in AI and its history. And I was thinking back to when we first met, which was about 6 years ago. And it was really...
It's been that long.
a long time. And it was really at the kind of height of that Silicon Valley inspired enthusiasm for superintelligence. And I think when we first met, I was kind of telling you or talking to you like, oh, the future's going to be amazing. We're going to have driverless cars and machines are going to do all the housework, and then it will be unamazing because then the machines are going to take over the earth and they're going to kill us all. And you had said, the future's not going to be like that. And I wondered if one of the reasons you wrote your book was because you were so bored with people getting your subject so wrong.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think that, certainly while I was writing the book, algorithms and AI became more and more a part of our lives and began to have kind of effects on the intimate parts of our lives and our political decisions, our day-to-day work, and even our intimate relationships. And I think that people were overestimating what they really were and misinterpreting a bit what they actually are. So I felt it was necessary to kind of come in and help people understand them better.
Yeah. And so you really wanted to set out the real issues that we were going to face in our relationship with technology.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it must be you must be pleased that 6 years on, the whole conversation has just moved on so much.
It has indeed. And of course, we're all dominated by COVID-19 now, but I do think COVID-19 will help this conversation advance in a lot of ways. And I think that we'll still be talking about AI in a year's time, even though right now all anybody's talking about is lockdowns and viruses.
it's interesting, this idea of the way we think about technology and the stories we tell ourselves about technology are so important. I was really surprised to find out that there's a whole department at the University of Cambridge which is exactly about this. It really looks at the stories that we tell ourselves about technology and how this affects our mental health, our health, and our happiness, particularly in terms of how competent the stories we tell ourselves about how competent we are when we compare ourselves with machines.
Yeah, and I think that we've had a downgrading of human beings with regard to how competent we think we are, particularly in the last 3, 4, 5 years. In 2016, the topic at Davos, the World Economic Forum, was, that a large number of human jobs are going to be displaced by machines. Now, I don't believe that's wrong, but I do believe that the foundations upon which it were built was the idea that there are a great many human tasks that machines can do just as well as us that are highly automatable. I think that that's probably inaccurate and methodologically flawed in itself. I think that machines will take a lot of human jobs, but not because they do those jobs well, but it's because they do those jobs in a cheap fashion. And I think people need to realize that, one of the jobs that was highly rated to be taken was receptionist. And certainly if one thinks about a receptionist as someone who basically checks that someone has a badge and gets them to write in their name on a form, then certainly that's a job that you don't need a human being for pretty easily. If one thinks of a receptionist as someone who's the face of your company, who greets people, who makes people feel comfortable, then that's not something that you can substitute for, really.
I remember you saying at the time that you were, you you were really surprised that they had the Davos report had said that supermodels were easily replaced by computers.
Yeah, fashion models. In fact, they're one of the most replaceable jobs, and it's I use it as an illustration of the fact that the reasoning that's being used to say what jobs can be taken by computers is inherently algorithmic in itself, and then highly simplifying about jobs. And in fact, if you read in the book that discussion I have, you can see precisely why models were rated as one of the most computerizable jobs. And it's because of a methodological flaw, an algorithmic flaw in the analysis of how people actually work. And I think it's one of the most ironic illustrations I've ever run up on, because they've essentially used an algorithm to categorize what jobs algorithms can take. And then it turns out it has this kind of ridiculous flaw that pops up immediately.
I think we've understood that. We had a conversation earlier about we want everyone to understand, your area. So we will unpack some of that, and we're all going to understand algorithms by the end of it. So why does what we think about our relationship with technology matter, do you think?
Well, I think you alluded to it earlier. It's about how much we believe in ourselves, and if we start believing that the way that we reason about the world is profoundly flawed, and that makes us all feel stupid. And the fact is that the way people reason about the real world is amazing, just amazing. I'll use an illustration. A few years ago, everyone would have heard that the game of Go was kind of computerized to this program called AlphaGo that Google developed. And Go's an ancient game, Chinese game, in the same category of profound complexity as chess,
right,
but in fact a bit more complex and really quite elegant, beautiful game. Basically, they programmed a computer to learn, in quotes, how to play it, and it played so well it beat one of the world's Go masters 4 out of 5 times. Now, if you understand the way the algorithm works, effectively, it hasn't really learned how to play Go. It's learned how to turn Go into a huge game of numbers. And once it turned that game into that game of numbers, it's actually stunning that a human being can still beat that program 1 time out of 5. And it really points out how sophisticated human reasoning is, because once you realize that you can turn a lot of games into just massive computational problems where you just look ahead massively and apply. I mean, the amount of computing power behind AlphaGo is extraordinary. It's a monstrous computer. And effectively throw that much computer power at it, and you only beat a human being 4 out of 5 times. I think that says a lot more about what human beings are capable of than it does about what computers are capable of.
Yeah, it's almost like, yeah, good at counting, but don't get carried away.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, exactly.
But I remember you saying that, you even had a problem almost with the terms artificial intelligence because they almost undermined, again, our kind of brilliance as humans.
Yeah, it's a confusing terminology, artificial intelligence, because first of all, intelligence is itself a really poorly understood phenomena, and it's very closely related to things like the IQ test, which is a highly reductionist test that's been related. Yeah, it's been related to a lot of prejudiced things. And then the other word is artificial. And the interesting thing about artificial is it has 2 meanings. One of them is artificial in the sense of artificial light. Now, artificial light is light. It's just light made by light bulbs instead of the sun. So it's artificially created in the sense that it's man-made light. That's one way that artificial works. The other way artificial works is artificial flowers. Artificial flowers are not flowers. They're imitations of flowers. And because of those 2 meanings, the term artificial intelligence can straddle the line in between. And people cannot really understand when they talk about an artificially intelligent computer, which one is it? Is it an imitation, or is it something created that really has that quality? And I think that usually it's the latter, but it causes a lot of confusion. So I prefer the term, and this is a term from a science fiction author I really like, pseudo-intelligence. Because pseudo-intelligence is clearly just an imitation, right? Pseudo means imitation. So it's unambiguous that artificial intelligence is imitating what human beings are doing. It is not recreating it.
Yeah, it's really important. Thank you. And it's just such a useful way of understanding technology. Okay, so the subtitle of your book, I see, you've got the crisp memo there, Robert. I like that.
Sorry,
you've got the crisp menu.
This is to relax the audience into having some crisp.
Yeah. I think the more difficult the subject, the more creative the cocktail or mocktail that you want.
Yes, indeed. I think
this is a high level subject. So okay. So the subtitle of your book is really interesting. It's about it's a big claim. Are we at risk? Are we at risk of being a bigot?
Indeed. So here's the thing about algorithms. I say that algorithms are prejudiced. And the reason I say that is I think it's very careful. It's very important when we talk about technology to understand the words we're using. And I think prejudice means to prejudge. It means to judge ahead of the presentation of all the evidence. And in fact, most algorithms that we talk about in AI today, that's precisely what they're doing. What they're doing is drawing statistical conclusions from lots of big data. And then they're using those to generalize about future cases. And in fact, that's the nature of prejudging and of prejudice. And in fact, one of the illustrations I use now is to say, if one was to take a very narrow database view of COVID-19 and look at it in the very early days, one could basically say, well, this is a virus that affects Chinese people. Which of course it isn't. It's a virus that affects everybody, but the data would show you that if you took too narrow a view of the data alone. And then later on, you basically say, well, this is a disease that likes to kill Italians, but not Germans, and British people, but not Germans. And the thing is those things aren't true. They're only true if you look through a really narrow data filter. And they do sound prejudiced because they're prejudging something that's really very complex. And effectively, all algorithms have this quality that effectively they're only looking at things that are a very narrow, very non-human lens. And because of that, they have the characteristic that they can prejudge. Now, how does that make us all into bigots? Well, right now, we receive a tremendous amount of our news through algorithmic means. So our view of the world comes through a lens, a curation that's algorithmic. And those prejudices that are data-based and narrow are effectively there. And they're judging us that way. So your Facebook feed is judging you by basically making some narrow categorizations about who you are, and then basically saying this person wants to see news like that. And so our view of the world, and like that, is also narrow in itself. So effectively, our view of the world is being filtered through this narrowing lens, which is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that we have such a simplified political world now, where we've all been divided into categories. We all see the world differently, and we're all very divided and angry at one another. And yeah, so yeah, that's why I kind of subtitled it that way.
No, it's brilliantly put, and I think it's really important to, to be taking a look at it. And I think one of the big shocking things about your book, and I don't really understand why we feel like this, but we definitely do, is this idea that we tend to think of technology as being apolitical in itself. And amoral, and and without prejudice. And I think this is what we really need to get to grips with, if we can, in this short time, is to really have a look at these algorithms and how they're doing it and what's in them that is serving us up information like this. Because when else but lockdown are we going to have the chance to really get to grips with algorithms, Robert?
Yeah, indeed. And I think there's a historical reason why we kind of think that machines think better than we do is effectively, it's got a long history. But if you go back and look at Descartes, for instance, Descartes kind of looked at the idea of rationale as the thing that separates us from animals, and he meant kind of mathematical rationale. And then as time evolved and the science evolved, and science is such an effective method for getting things done in many ways, that view, that getting things done in an engineering sense, that view of ourselves, that the rational part of ourselves is the elevated part, and everything else, our emotions, our kind of spiritual feelings, things like that, our social feelings, are all kind of less than. Well, that kind of became deeply encoded in the idea of economics, because economics has this idea of the rational man. The rational man is the perfect economic actor, and we become a very economics kind of driven society in the West, and in fact globally. And so that rationale idea, if we were just more rational, we'd all get it right. And then one of the things this is not me, this is something I quote, is economics is the only science where if the world doesn't fit the data, the model, if the world doesn't fit the model, then the world is wrong.
About right? Dark matter.
Yeah. Wow, that's good counterpoint, but that's an interesting one. Actually, there's some interesting new physics that bears on that, but we're not talking about physics today. But here's the thing: is I think we live in an economically driven world that's basically a science that basically says our natural reasoning that we do every day is less than if we basically looked at the world more purely quantitatively. Now, those of you who have friends who look at the world in a deeply and purely quantitative way all the time will know that those are not the most functional people. Right, those are not the people who deal best with the world. Robust human intelligence involves both rationale and sensitivity. Of subtlety. That's what human intelligence is really about. We do live in a social world. We have to be sensitive to emotions and sociality. And in fact, those characteristics make us deal better with real uncertainty about the world. They're human things that make us deal with the uncertain human world better. And those things are not in our mechanistic approach to AI today, and haven't been yet. And maybe someday they will be, but to some extent, that's a bit of a rabbit hole. I get a lot of questions where people say, do you think there'll ever be real AI someday? And my answer is, I don't really care that much. What I care about is the fact that I think our view of ourselves and our view of technology today is potentially harmful. And we need to get a grip on our own value now. We need to basically understand how valuable we are now, because we're in a world where I think that the value of the individual and the value of society, both those things together, are really being fairly severely undermined.
It's a really, really interesting, position to come from as a scientist, to hear from a scientist. It really is, and so needed. And it's such an interesting idea, this idea that rationality, because it's so encoded with our idea of what is important in society, is being overvalued from the feeling side, the spiritual side, and they do need bringing together. It's fascinating. We're going to unpick that a little bit more, but tell us, you're an expert in evolutionary algorithms. I think we need to know, what are they?
So there's a whole field of subfield of artificial intelligence that I've been involved in for a long, long time that has to do with modeling the idea of adaptation as if it was evolution. So we effectively try to solve problems by basically making little populations of solutions and letting them battle it out so that you get better and breed and make better solutions. That's the simple way to put it. And it's a field that's been around for a long time. It's become, like most AI technologies, it was a field of its on its own, and now it's kind of become a ubiquitous part of the way people do things. So now, if you look at the way um, algorithms evolve their interaction with people, really in many ways it's like an evolutionary algorithm. It's effectively, you've got lots of agents, you got lots of programs out there on the internet that are interacting with one another and interacting with people, and a natural evolution of their effect is created. So in many ways, I think my insights from programming algorithms, small algorithms that work that way and focus problems, gives me technical insight into the larger evolution of the way our algorithmically mediated world is evolving. And I think that the conclusions I draw from that are that our algorithmically kind of mediated world, the world where we're interacting with algorithms all the time, constantly, is evolving towards a fairly, in evolutionary computation, we'd say it's prematurely converging. And what we really mean there is that we have narrow, non-adaptive solutions. We have rigid, narrow, non-adaptive solutions that basically I think are really quite brittle. That if things change in drastic ways, as they always do, that effectively we'll see really unpleasant inability to adapt. And we can talk. I know you're headed towards us talking more about the whole diversity issue, so I'll let that park until
Yeah,
we get to it later.
absolutely. Yeah, and as we're seeing now with C19, brittle systems is something I want to touch on as well. But
Sure.
can you explain to us, give us an example of where an algorithm shows bias and prejudice?
Okay. Well, there are lots of examples. Really, really simple ones. And for instance, in the UK, and by the way, this is really, you haven't heard this one yet, but there's a similar example in Australia. In the UK, when you apply for a new passport, you've got to upload your photo. And when you upload your photo, it checks it for various things that are wrong. Like you can't close your eyes, you can't wear eyeglasses, you can't have your mouth open. And so there's an instance where a guy, Afro-British guy, basically, more precisely, a dark-skinned fellow, basically uploaded his photo, and it said, "Sorry, rejected. Your mouth is open." And he tried again, same result. Went around in circles for a while, and then finally had to end up with the inconvenience of having to try to get through the phone to basically call up and get his passport, because and having that extra inconvenience. The reason is because his lower lip, which was quite large compared to my completely non-existent lips, looked to the algorithm as if it were an open mouth and a tongue because he had big lips. And the thing is, so there's your kind of, that sounds a bit like traditional prejudice. And I'll tell you why it happened. The interesting thing is in Australia, I didn't know this till I did an Australian book tour recently. Very similar case was reported where a guy of Asian origin basically uploaded his photo, got rejected because his eyes were closed. They kept telling him his eyes were closed, and it's just that he had relatively narrow eyes when compared to a lot of Australians. And see, the reason these stereotypical effects exist is because the data that's being used to train it and the algorithm are basically going to try to make the best statistically average conclusion. On statistical averages, white Caucasian people, whatever the hell that means, basically have a certain facial characteristic, and that's getting encoded into the algorithm because the algorithm, in order to eliminate error, is basically going to try to focus its error on the minority because that's the way to get rid of error. Is basically, the people who are minority cases, rule them out. Now, so both of these things end up looking like traditional prejudice. Black people have big lips. Chinese people have narrow eyes, because it's simplified digestion of images by statistical algorithms that focus on minorities as outliers. So the thing is that are there ways to technically overcome these things? Yes, there are. Are they not? Are they will induce other kinds of bias that we won't expect because they're constantly narrow, and ultimately you do have to have human beings interacting in human systems. But the thing is, and this is the thing to notice, this is both those guys ended up going through a real hassle because sure, there's a human being there. You just got to get somebody on the phone. Try to get somebody on the phone when you're trying to get a passport. So that's where it basically ends up hurting people who are in minority groups.
Okay, and I think it's a really good example, and I think it's a great example because I think some of the things that have been said about algorithms, particularly with news content of why does this happen, is that that it's just big data is a scary mirror that just reflects back how we really are, which I know that
Right.
you just don't believe, or that it's the
Well, in some instances, there's some truth to that. It's just that if you don't realize that that algorithms have this inherent simplifying characteristic about people, then you're only looking at a part of the problem. There are, and also, and this is the really important thing, and I know you know this, is that it's a part of a feedback loop. Right. I was talking earlier about COVID-19 and the identification of it as being Chinese or being, anti-German or whatever. The thing is that if you think of, if we didn't have news readers basically telling us otherwise, we didn't have people basically saying that's not true, then effectively that could get reinforced as a prejudice. And then the prejudice influences the way we analyze the disease. And then that feeds back again as a prejudice. And we get a feedback loop that reinforces negative things. And this is the real worrisome thing. In instances where there's no human mediation, there's no human being involved who basically says, hold on now, this isn't about being Chinese. It's not about being German. You have the possibility of people believing that, taking it forward, it influencing the way data is generated further or the way algorithms are generated further, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Now, before we go to the break, I want to talk a bit about the history of big data and politics, and and I know that you were really, really keen to explain that this is not new. This is something that we can look back at history and really understand, and just how dangerous it can be when this is turned on people. So, I mean, you really didn't have to go far from home to find out the evidence for this happening in the past, did you?
Not at all. I'm from Alabama originally,
Oh, I was actually meaning UCL actually.
Oh yeah, well that's another thing. I'm from Alabama originally, and also I work at UCL, and UCL is where when the University College London was founded, there was a department of eugenics. Now there's some debate as whether it's a department or a laboratory, but it's a new university, so it's all a bit faded in memory. But eugenics was a thrust at UCL, and
A thrust.
that was because a thrust. Yeah, it was a definite, it was a part of what people were trying to do was eugenics, because at the time a lot of very liberal people thought that eugenics, the idea of trying to influence the betterment of society through trying to get people who are inferior, in quotes, to breed less and people who are superior to breed more, was a positive thing. This included Winston Churchill, Maynard Keynes, Neville Chamberlain, Margaret Sanger, a great many people who we think of as kind of modern liberal thinkers. The thing is it all generated a kind of statistical science of human quality. And that statistical science developed quite a few algorithms that are now mainstream AI stuff. Notably, those, if there are any people out there who are AI guys in the audience, the principal component analysis algorithm and singular value decomposition and factor analysis and similar algorithms, if you know those all come from the eugenics movement directly. And so this idea of simplifying people quantitatively comes from eugenics and actually has a direct heritage into the algorithms we use today. Now, to be careful, those algorithms can have real value for getting real things done. But when you point them at human beings, you got to be really cautious, or you end up very rapidly going into an area of kind of bigotry.
Okay, I think I had misunderstood. So your idea of looking at history was not to kind of use it as an illustrative way of how these big data sets can really do damage in terms of when you're pointing them at people, but actually within the systems that you're using within AI, that you're encoded within that are views.
It's a direct heritage. The once you start quantifying human beings, you inevitably are at the boundary of treating human beings in really um, crude categories and putting them in kind of boxes. And that is historical, and it has a direct relationship. I don't even, in the book, I try to show this line of development, and it runs through kind of the eugenics movement, it runs through economics, and then it runs into modern computing science. And I show it there. I couldn't put in all the connections. There are so many connections between those two things. And the reason is, once you start quantifying people, you can't stay far away from this. Now, there's good science and good economics that are built on those quantifying ideas, but only when there are human beings there saying, now hold on, these are people. And the thing that's worrisome now is there are a lot of algorithms that affect our lives directly, where effectively there's no human being anymore. There's nobody checking what happens because it's just going on automatically in the background. And when you get these effects like the one I talked about, the photo example, I have dozens of other examples. These are the things that came up in the news. These are things that got to the point of being a news story. There are probably dozens or even more cases of algorithmic prejudice that are going missed because the people involved never get to speak out.
Okay. What a place to go for a break.
Yeah, awesome.
I think you've given us a really good example, a really good introduction to your work on algorithms. I hope you're ready for a break, refresh your drinks, get ready, get a cup of tea. Do text in anything you'd like to ask Robert, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Can't wait. See you in 10.
your crisp bowl is replenished and you have yourself a little something to drink, you'll be glad to know Robert has a Manhattan ready to go. It's very sophisticated. Thank you so much for your questions. And I just wanted to say a few hellos to Salon members. Salon members, people who come to all of the events that we do across the year. And everyone is welcome to be a Salon member if you want to. So I'd just like to say hello to Sue and Susie and Marcus and Jill and James in Ibiza, hello, and Catherine A and Anne W and Anne Cecile in Paris and Norma and Sylvia and Steve. Hello, Salon members. Hope you're well. Okay, so Robert, I've got a question for you from Molly. And the question is, in your book, you talk about manipulation of our basest instincts. What do you believe these to be?
That's interesting. I'm not a behavioral scientist and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not terribly qualified to answer that question. However, I will say this, is that I think that the things I talk about in algorithms doing, like simplifying people and generalizing about them and kind of placing them in categories, those are things people do, no doubt about it. You know, we can be quite tribal. We can be, we can basically say, people who look like me, or people the same gender as me, or people who have the same preferences as me, are people who I'm going to group with because I find familiarity with them. We can do those things, but we learn. This is the great strength of human beings: is that we're not simply our genetic programming. We learn things like to think, don't judge a man by the color of his skin, or don't judge a book by its cover, or have respect for other people even though they're different from you. We learn those things, and algorithms can be programmed with things, and they can learn them in some rough way. But the subtle concepts that really make up human intelligence, that involves not only the instincts we're given at birth, but the raising up we're given during our lives, are what make human beings so great. So I think our basest instincts are actually to simply place other people in simplifying categories.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Molly. Got a question from Laura, and she says, I can see that simplicity is the problem, that algorithms don't do nuance. But is there a greater problem that most algorithms that we see are trying to sell us something?
Absolutely, because and well observed, by the way. Good question. The thing is that most algorithms are driven by a simplifying optimization framework. They're trying to make a number bigger, or a set of numbers bigger in a way. And the thing is those numbers right now are typically economic. I think one of the ways we can make algorithms better is to emphasize and monitor carefully the social impacts that they have towards better effect. For instance, the delivery to people of diverse information is a social value, one that we used to employ in the regulation of media, that we've largely given up on in favor of the free market of information, which doesn't really work, does it? And in that kind of economic way that we've decided free markets regulate everything perfectly, which they clearly don't. The thing is I'm very pro-regulation, and I think that regulation has to be implemented towards good social effects, and that those can't be entirely based upon just numbers. They have to be evaluated for not just value, but for values.
Yes, no, it's really interesting. It's a great question. And, like you can certainly see that in terms of, the values that we have from, say, social media, that may not be our values if they weren't put in front of us all of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Social media is an interesting phenomena from which we can learn, but from which we're now suffering. But I do think the regulation of new media is going to be a new challenge, a new technical challenge. And the thing that I'm really an advocate for now, and the thing I really want to invest my research time and kind of work time in the future on, is the idea of what is the appropriate framework for regulating the world that we have now, because it's not going to be the same as the broadcast world, and it's certainly not what we're doing now.
Okay, well, it sounds like it's going to keep you busy. We might
I'll keep you busy.
Might have to get you back for that, Robert.
Yeah.
We've got a question from George, which actually, it really chimed with me actually, and it's just quite simply, why are we so impressed by technology? Why do we, overestimate its value and sort of underestimate our own value?
Wow, that's a complicated one. I think some of it's cultural. I mean, I think I would wonder. It would be interesting to look at other cultures and see how they've evaluated the role of technology. Like I said, I'm not a social scientist, but I imagine that other cultures may look at it differently. The other thing is we've been in a time where the world is dominated by scientific progress because there's been so damn much of it. And so it's just been a world. But then again, we're coming up now. COVID-19 is very interesting. COVID-19, although I think Helen and I talked about this earlier, I do think it will accelerate certain kinds of technological adoption. I mean, I've been using Zoom for a long time. Everybody's using Zoom today. There will be that, but I also think it places a premium on human interaction and on human factors because they're so rare for all of us now. So it could be that we have a bit of a change of emphasis with regard to the way we look at technology. I certainly hope so. I love technology. I'm a technology guy, but we really need to realize that we are special too, and society is special. We live in a world where Margaret Thatcher said society doesn't even exist. And the thing is that Boris Johnson has now had to come back and say, well, society really does exist, because if it doesn't exist, COVID-19 is going to destroy us all.
Okay, it's really. I just want to pick on something. I'll pick up on something you said there because it's really interesting. You said there's that COVID-19 has proved that there is a premium on human interaction. What do you mean?
Well, look, and I want everybody to ask themselves this. So Helen and I talked about this earlier, so she knows I want to say this. Is if somebody told me the pub was open at triple prices, like everything's 3 times the price, I'd be down at the pub. And I think there are a lot of people who feel that way now. The value of basically going around, being around a bunch of people, human beings in the social settings we used to be in has gone way up. And because we've all realized, if we go to a world where we don't have human interaction, it's going to be watching Netflix and being on Zoom all the time, which is what we're doing now, which, hey, it's okay. But, I really want to go to a pub lunch. And I think everybody does. And the other thing is the value of these, what do they call them? Low value workers, these workers who we want to exclude from our country. Well, that's what we call the NHS,
and care workers, care home,
and care workers, all the people who are out there, and delivery guys, and all those people out there who are working so very hard to keep our society going are marginalized workers who are under risk. I certainly hope we come out of this experience valuing them and not thinking, oh, we could just get robots to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there really was that idea, that I think it got a lot of traction in Japan. It's got an older population, and that exactly. Care homes would be operated by robot carers.
It's very interesting. I was on stage with an economist a while ago, and he was talking about these cuddly robots that are supposed to take care of elderly people, and said, why have they been so widely adopted in Japan? And my response was, well, everybody likes a squeezy toy. Sure, give me a squeezy toy. I like a squeezy toy, but by God, when I'm an old person, I want a carer. I don't want a squeezy robot toy. And I think everybody feels that way. I don't think anybody wants to have Teddy Ruxpin taking care of them when they're an old person.
Teddy Ruxpin.
Oh, maybe it's an American reference, but it was a 1970s kind of robotic teddy bear that kind of could say things, And actually, if you look at the quality, if you really look at the quality of these AI, care toys, they're basically, they're not much more than a squeezy toy when you get down to it. They're not doing things that are very, anybody. I know people out there have cared for an elderly person who has dementia or something. Everybody's had interactions with elderly people who have those kind of problems. You really think they're going to be happy, really happy, without by just kind of chatting to Siri?
Yeah,
really?
It's a really good point. And it's and it's a really lovely way to look at where technology it really really does kind of help illustrate your point that, you know, we really are seeing the limits to what technology can do for us, and what is absolutely prized as human and what cannot be replaced. You know,
Sure,
and how
indeed.
may would you have had to have done to get that across? You know,
Yeah,
it's just sort
exactly.
of, it's brilliantly illustrated. You know, but let's
Thank
stay on stay on COVID-19 for a bit. You know, we've talked about you know, what a lot of our other speakers that we've been talking to have been saying that one of the effects of this has been to accelerate trends that were going to come, you know, within the next, you know, few months or years. You know, and I just wondered if that was the case with technology, with algorithms. You know, are we going to see things come in much quicker than perhaps would have done?
And I think the answer is yes and no. I think that it'll make us realize the places where it'll work and the places where it won't. Algorithms to help drug designers, man, that's great stuff. And you know, the algorithms are not just discovering the drugs; they're helpful tools, and those kind of helpful tools are going to accelerate like mad. Understanding how diseases propagate, you know, and where they are and things, and all that stuff's going to work. You know, that's going to be great. There are things that aren't going to work, and a really simple example that I like to offer is the idea. I saw that there's a company that's trying to market effectively a robotic disinfector, and it's effectively, some of your audience will know what a Roomba is. And a Roomba is, they've been around for 20 years or so. Yeah, Roomba is a electronic vacuum. It looks kind of like a puck, and it goes around your house, vacuuming your house. If you've ever had one, and I have, you ever had one, they're all right, but they're really not that good. And one of the reasons is if you live in a house that's really like a Scandinavian, you know, kind of show home where everything's really nice and there's no rugs and there's nobody's throwing crap on the floor, they're fine. If you live in a house that has pillows on the floor and my wife's slippers and things like that, that is a problem for them because they don't like clutter really, and they're not very good around it. Human reality, they're not very good at, and plus a lot of other problems they have. Well, you know, you think about this in terms of a disinfecting robot. You know, in a high stress environment with a lot of patients who are dying, do you really want to rely on a robot to come in and disinfect things with a UV light? And I don't think you do. I think you want to go back to a human being who you think this person's going to look underneath the pillow where the virus may be hiding. And so these kind of subtle and use their highly articulated fingers to basically look underneath things and handle things. And these kind of premiums for the qualities of human beings, to basically say these qualities of human beings are important, are going to become a real thing and are going to be appreciated. And I think that's really good. It's not just the human caring. The human caring is really important, but the human fundamental trust, you know, it's like, I wouldn't trust the giant Roomba with the UV light on it. I would trust a nurse, you know, to go make sure the room is clean.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
Yeah, I want to see a robot wash its hands. Who realized that was so complicated?
Yeah, indeed.
We've got a question from Anne R. And I think it's, again, understanding the process of algorithms. She wanted to know, Robert, how does a good algorithm differ from make a human making a good decision?
Well, here's the thing: wow, that's a really complicated question. An algorithm will make a decision based on a narrow view of a bunch of quantities about things, and those quantities will be predetermined. Let's say those quantities might be the you know, kind of visual features like blobs. Turn your face into a bunch of blobs, and it makes a decision about those blobs. Or the kind of questions you get on Match.com. It makes a decision based on a list of questions and things like that. And many of us have done things like Match.com. I met my wife through an online dating site. But the thing is that although that can make a kind of rough cut, all of us know that the reason you marry somebody is because of subtle things you couldn't possibly describe. And because you couldn't possibly describe them, that means a programmer couldn't possibly describe them. And that means that the algorithm doesn't understand them. So while eHarmony and Match.com and Guardian Soulmates, things like that can be useful to expose you to people who you might like, anybody who's done internet dating knows that the error rate's really about the same as meeting people at a party. what really makes them useful is the high volume of numbers of people that you meet. And so algorithms treat things in the, and Match.com is an excellent example. Everybody's filled out the survey, right? And the survey is kind of useful, but everybody knows that's those, are they between 20 and 50? And are they over 5'11"? And, do they like outdoor activities is not the way you ultimately pick the person you spend the rest of your life with.
But you must have a special place in your heart for the algorithm that brought you and Paula together, no?
It's a weird one. I think really the thing that brought us, and there are a lot of jokes I could tell here. My wife thinks it's hilarious that on my photo, on my profile, I basically said that women between 20 and 50 were fine. So I thought that was open-minded. She thought that was pathetic. But the thing is what really got us together, I think, is, let's be honest. I liked, she had a great strap line. Her strap line was Maud seeks Harold, and which I really liked because it said, I don't know, but she isn't 80 years old and I wasn't 16, but the thing is I liked that. It was that kind of stuff that kind of got me, and it only got me to talk to her. And then once I talked to her, that was the reason we got together. And everybody who's done internet dating knows this is the algorithm that picks the people you match with is a tiny part of why you end up actually wanting to see somebody.
Yeah, I've got it. I know it's lovely to hear that though. I wanted to ask you, we didn't get to cover it in the first half, and I think it's really interesting, is to talk a little bit about the IQ test, because I think it really brilliantly illustrates how we tend to think of technology that we use as being really apolitical, amoral, without having anything in it. And I just wondered if you could explain why it actually is such a blunt instrument.
It is a blunt instrument. It's interesting that it was derived, that the original IQ test was come up with a man named Alfred Binet. He's a French guy. He basically was studying intelligence. And at the time he was doing that, the French, like the English, very late in the game, have decided to educate kids to a higher age. So he was trying to help with education. He was a guy who was really interested in what makes people intelligent. And so he came up with this test, but he was very strict in the way he interpreted the test, and basically said, look, this test is about identifying kids who need help. It's not a precise enough instrument to basically place people into categories of intelligence. Well, unfortunately, that test was investigated by guys in the US who basically were interested in restricting immigration. They were eugenicists, and they were interested in restricting immigration primarily. And they wanted to place people into categories of acceptable and unacceptable, and a lot of other really nasty things, by the way. The categories of people who were so moronic, and the word moron comes from an interpretation of the IQ test. This is interesting, is that the word moron didn't exist until some guys in the States basically decided a category of numbers out of that test were people they would describe as morons. And they were doing things like sterilizing people, and so that they wouldn't reproduce in the States.
Based on the IQ test.
Based on the IQ test, or variants of it, and denying people immigration. And ultimately, a lot of those guys in those early eugenics movements were also guys who consulted on the Nuremberg laws. And in the Americans, there were American consultants who determined the Nuremberg laws in Nazi Germany. And most people don't know that. And they were guys who were proponents of the IQ test. And then something I know Helen knows about is that at some point in the IQ test history, it was discovered that women generally did better on the IQ test on average than men.
Let's just recap that. So on the IQ test,
yes,
women in its raw state, the women were
in the
in
the late 1930s, it was discovered that women in general did better on the IQ test than men. So they changed the test.
What did they change it to?
They added questions, most of them about sports. And you look it up, this is absolutely true, is that in order to basically make the test where it was more fair to men, the IQ test was changed. And the IQ test is perpetually being altered. The thing is, it's being altered, according to political effects of the time, and it's the people it's being are altered by are obviously not a diverse representation of society in themselves. Much like algorithms. I mean, the thing is, algorithms today are being programmed by people who aren't a diverse group of people, and undoubtedly there are people who will have their own prejudices. And I'm not assigning nefarious intent to those individuals, but they are who they are, and they know what they know. I'm an old white guy from Alabama. you know uh, I'm aware enough to know that carries with it baggage, that I have to cope with every day. But there are plenty of people out there working in groups who won't realize their baggage at all. And many of those people are the people who are designing algorithms that affect us every day.
It's a really good example, and I think the IQ test seems so unremarkable and such a piece of the furniture of modern life in terms of thinking about intelligence. And there you are, what a history. I think it's just so good at kind of like trying to get to grips with what we're facing now, to have examples like that. You mentioned diversity a couple of times in your answer, and that I wanted to ask a question about diversity. We did a salon earlier this year with Adam Rutherford, the geneticist, and he really blew my mind when he sort of said that it was diversity in genes that ensured our survival, not
Absolutely.
kind of like smaller groups getting better and better. It's not, it wasn't survival of the fittest. It's not the best genes. It's the amount that you have coming in that is survival.
Yeah, it's an alternative. If you look at the interpretation of Darwin's theory that came very, very quickly after the theory was derived, that there was an interpretation of it as survival of the fittest. That was not in the original Origin of the Species. It was added 10 years later in the 5th edition. And the thing is survival of the fittest is an interpretation of evolution that basically says the good things survive and the bad things go away. In reality, and by the way, that had a very social interpretation. That term comes from society, not from biology. And the thing is that in a real world, good and bad are, not that clear cut. And what evolution does in the real world is it basically ensures that you got sufficient advancement balanced with sufficient diversity, so that if things change dramatically, like say COVID-19 appears, you have the flexibility to adapt. And that's why diversity is so important. Diversity is important because it is the fuel of adaptation. If you look at COVID-19, the companies that are going to hit the wall are the companies that have derived highly globalized, just-in-time supply chains that are inflexible, because that inflexibility, coupled with the scale and the fragility of what they built, will fall apart. Those companies that have the ability to robustly adapt, they have diversity in their suppliers, they have diversity in the way they can do things. Those people will survive. And it's just like that with everything that an algorithm might influence. An algorithm, if it basically has narrow criteria that don't include the idea of diversity and the idea of adaptive angles of getting out. And by the way, it's not about building in angles that you foresee. It's precisely about building in diversity because you can't foresee what you need. That's what diversity is all about, is the idea that you don't know. So have lots of stuff while still doing as good as you can in terms of optimizing, but have lots of different stuff. Different stuff could be different ideas, different people, different conceptualizations of the world. Have that diversity, because that's your strength when the world changes in ways you won't expect, like COVID-19.
And that's what you're saying with the simplification of algorithms. We're really at risk of losing or not valuing that diversity. Yeah,
precisely. Particularly the question we had earlier about economic gain as a criteria. Is economic gain is a narrowing criteria, and therefore, if it might encourage a lack of diversity, we see the impact of this on political discourse. Basically, personalization of information so that people can sell as ads basically has narrowed the way that information is served to all of us, and what that's led to is a lack of diversity in our perspectives, and therefore a polarization of, there's a difference between diversity and having tribes, like tribes where there's no interchange, where people live on different continents effectively with regard to information. That's not real diversity, because I use the word diversity. Mixing is really important, right? And evolutionary computation guys know this. It's not just having diversity, but it's making sure the diversity gets mixed. If it doesn't get mixed, there's no real advantage.
Fascinating stuff, Robert. Got one more question that I'm gonna go out on, and it's more of a personal one, really. I know that you were born in Alabama. I know that you grew up in the shadow of segregation, and I knew you grew up in the shadow of appalling race laws. And I just wanted to know, is your desire to stop bigotry, to stop racism in a machine, is it influenced from where you were born and when you grew up?
Absolutely. I grew up in a world that was very racist. Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from, I've been to the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham, which I would recommend to anybody to visit. And the degree to which it was the most racist city in the world at one time, right around the time I was being born, it was literally the most racist city in the world. There were laws. You couldn't play checkers with somebody who had a different skin color than you. I mean, against the law, like stated in the law, you can't play checkers or any board games with people who are of a different color than you. And, I grew up after that, but when I went to school, there was anti-segregation busing, and effectively, kids were bussed in from the ghetto, Black kids, into my school. And it was federally mandated. The state hated it, but the federal government said it had to be done. And as a bullied kid in Alabama, there's an event that happened in my life where a Black girl basically gave me some advice about being bullied and told me to hold my head up. And it still tears. I mean, it's funny. It still tears me up to this day. I've said this a million times in interviews, and it still kind of gets to me. Is that changed my life? And because that girl had that perspective of the idea of self-respect, that from being abused, from being a person in an underprivileged category, she was able to tell me, some geeky kid who was getting beat up, to hold my head up, and that was the key. And that diversity and that mixing of ideas changed who I am and affects me every single day of my life. And if we don't have that kind of, and that's the impact of diversity on the individual, right? And if we don't have that, if the people listening here today don't have that for their kids are disadvantaged. So, it's very important to me. It's profoundly important to me. And I worry about, algorithms not having those social values. And that's my mission,
It is your mission, using your powers for good.
Yeah,
Can't ask any more than that, Robert. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this evening for our Sunday night book club live, where we have grappled with algorithms, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Helen Bagnall. I'm founder of Salon London, of Book Club Live, and of the Also Festival, and we're doing a digital version of our festival mid-May. Please come and join us, and do come and be part of another book club live in the future. Thank you so much. This book club live is now closed.
Helen.